Okay, you can begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Gopichan, and I will be one of your lecturers, and your other lecturer will be Keitling Batu. In this chapter of Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose, we are looking at the process of creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment, analyzing the moral dimensions of transforming leadership, as well as an examination of the ethical influences that you can have on your organization through behavior. Creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. Some leaders are often faced with the challenge of closing the gap between expectations and reality, where they would expect leadership to go a certain way for them, but in reality, it doesn't. Because of that, they often find themselves in ethical dilemmas. When this happens, we often try to fix the problem immediately, or we pretend we don't see anything wrong. However, avoidance leaves us troubled, and making a decision too quick leaves people questioning our leadership and our ethics. So my question to you is, have you ever been in an ethical dilemma before, such as hiding something or acting like nothing's wrong? Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Care to, care to elaborate? Anyone? Titu? No? Alessa?
I mean, I guess maybe with my parents, keeping something from them.
Right.
Like
Okay. Well,
that.
yeah, that could work. Right. So on to us to create and sustain an ethical organizational environment. We must first understand how ethical theories and concept works by learning organizational codes of conduct, whether it be set by you or in other organizations. We have here Nash 1990, who would have proposed 4 qualities to help us improve our ethical standards within an organization or group. Critical thinking skills, which allows us to analyze an ethical analyze all the ethical components of a problem before making a decision. High degree of integrity. Having a high degree of integrity is what would allow us to stand up for our personal and professional ethics. Open-mindedness. Being open-minded is something we've been hearing since the start of this course, and it's really important as it gives us the ability to see things from other people's perspective or view. Personal motivation. This is important because if you don't have the motivation within the organization to do the correct things, people will obviously be pushing you around. Nash 1990 would have also said, when we master these 4 qualities, they turn into behavior and actions that would help create the ethical organizational environment. One thing to note when practicing good ethical behavior is you should be prepared to be criticized. You should be able to see your friends and members talk bad stuff about you, and you, in worst case scenario, watch them leave your side. You would typically see them switching up on you when you're trying to correct them from doing the wrong thing, or they themselves are not willing to accept you for your changes in a step to better yourself. The organization or group's purpose should be to identify its values. Therefore, when an ethical or moral issue arises, group involvement within the decision-making process would allow for the establishment of an ethical environment. This would also mean members feel empowered to hold each other accountable, participate in moral talks or dialogues, and work together to help sustain the ethical environment. Now let's talk about bad leadership and unethical behavior. Now, does anyone know what is Enron or who this man here is? Anyone? Constantine, anyone?
No.
Okay, well, now this is a picture of him here in handcuffs, right? This man here, his name is Andrew Faston. He is a convicted felon and a former chief financial officer for Enron, which is a energy trading and utilities company located in Texas. Just before Enron went bankrupt, Andrew was fired for unlawfully maintaining personal stakes by making more entries in their balance sheet than normal. And while doing that, he was able to defraud Enron's over $10 million. And from this case, we can see that not all leadership is good, as he would have been of high power. We have Kinderman 2004 and Lipman Blue 2005, who would have addressed the beliefs of bad or toxic leadership and their negative consequences. Here they would have provided us with two categories of bad leadership, which is the ineffective leader, which is the one that fails to achieve the organizational goals, and the unethical leader, which is the one that fails to determine right from wrong. No, leaders can be both ineffective and unethical, or they could be one or the other, which means a leader can be ineffective in the manner that they do their activities, but at the same time, they could be considered as an ethical leader. And yes, this is quite possible because although the goals of an organization were not accomplished, the person would have still led with integrity and an ethical manner. Lipman, Bluman, 2005 here would have described toxic leadership as those who engage in numerous destructive behaviors and who exhibit certain dysfunctional personal characteristics. To count as toxic, these behaviors and qualities of character must inflict some reasonably serious and enduring harm on the followers of the organization. So before we go to the next slide, does anyone have or does anyone know of any toxic leadership behaviors? Alyssa?
Not being fair.
That's one, yeah. Anyone else?
Not being honest,
Yes.
which is bad.
Yes, that's a good one, yes. Anyone else? Yeah.
Controlling.
Say back that in here.
Too controlling.
Yes, that's a very good one, yes. Okay, now let's get into what it is. Here are some examples of the traits and behaviors that these toxic leaders have. So leaving their followers worse off than they would have found them is one. We have consciously feeding their followers illusions that enhance the leader's power and impair the followers' capacity to act independently. Misleading followers through deliberate untruths and misdiagnosis of issues and power. Enormous ego that blind leaders to the shortcomings of their own characters and thus limit their capabilities for self-renewals, and along with the rest of what you all would have said, would be considered as toxic leadership. And while being ethical allows you to be rewarded and feel a level of accomplishment, it also teaches us what is acceptable and what is not when it comes to the organization and its behavior. On the other hand, unethical behavior should be addressed. So my next question is, how how would you correct bad or unethical behavior that you would have seen in an organization or in a group project? How would you correct it? Such as what it was talking about, unfair treatment and stuff like that.
Well, that happened a lot to me when I used to work in an organization
Right.
and a few group projects in the past. And the first thing I would do is have a conversation with that particular leader, right? And if it then resolves there, you move up, chain of command.
Sounds good, yeah. Anyone else? No? No problem. Well, just a quick reminder that individuals have the shared responsibility of confronting individuals like Melinda would have done in the group that she was in, to individuals who would have violated the organizational standards or practice. With that being said, in the past 1900 or so, public humiliation was a method that was used to punish violators of the unethical or failing to follow the laws. And from the pictures here, you would have seen that this is a type of public humiliation where you would be in a like a headlock with your hands or stuff like that, and there'd usually be a sign at the bottom stating that stating what the wrongdoings you would have done. I don't know if you all probably would have seen this in movies or like on TV or something like that, and they'd usually just like be throwing stuff at you. Anybody ever seen this before? Like, no? No?
Yeah, in movies.
Yeah, I saw that in a couple of movies already.
Yeah, so this was a method that they used to use before in the 1900s to kind of deal with these people. But now, in the 21st century, we don't allow public humiliation. So how we would deal with unethical behavior in our workplace is a superior, such as, well, the HR department would usually start off by giving you a warning letter stating, well, pick up on your actions or you have a consequence, right? Then the next method, if you don't listen to that, would be, you get a suspension, which would usually be like for a week or two, something like that. And then the final step, if those two don't work as a method of correcting your actions, the final step would obviously be to fire. Now, this leads to my next point, which is the lack of a positive ethical environment. And some organizations lack the positive ethical environment because of the poor leadership or individuals who are not committed to their morals. Therefore, these organizations would reward their members for doing the wrong things, because to them this would be seen as an improvement to them. And here we would have had a survey done by Gallup in 2003 on moral values in America. From doing that poll in the United States, they would have found that only 22% of Americans believe that morals within the country were actually good and true, and the other 77% would have described it as being poor or unethical. They would have also followed up with a second question of, do you think that the morals are getting better in the country? And believe it or not, 67% of these individuals commented to say that no, it is actually getting worse. So aside from that, now we would have talked about the ways to combat unethical leadership by the public humiliation. So now what about the leaders? What about the leaders who actually follow all the rules and standards? Leaders who are committed to leading with integrity will face their own dilemmas of what to do when their values and principles clash with the organizational standards. This leaves them in a very difficult position and only offers them 3 choices. Ignore or put up with the situation, which means it will constantly be, troubling them in the back of their mind. They can also try to address the situation and work to change the organizational climate into one that is ethical by nature, but in doing so, it comes the risk of, being the one that hated in the organization. And the last one, what I would be considered as the best option, is to leave the organization. Good leaders often struggle with these decisions every day, and this is why it is important to have good morals. Moral courage as an act of courage. Moral purpose as an act of courage. So one question is, what would you describe morals as, and how do you think morals relate to courage? Anyone? Anyone know what morals is?
Morals is basically doing the right thing.
Yes, and how does it relate to being courageous?
I guess you have to have strength to communicate whether someone is not doing the right thing or not. So that would be courage in a sense.
Yes, great. Okay. Moral courage is the willingness to endure some type of hardship, such as risking losing a friend or a job from doing the right thing. Therefore, upholding one's principles and putting them into action is what allows us to operate with moral courage. Kinder 2005 described moral courage as the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up the ethical challenges firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. Leaders and members who are ethical in the way they do things and who demonstrates good leadership knows that leadership is having a good moral, being courageous, and being responsible. Now, who are people you would consider as leaders who act with moral purpose? Anybody have highlight ideas? Anyone?
Teachers.
Anyone else? Constantine?
Police officers.
Yes, I am glad that earlier using that normal leaders rather than the high-power leaders, and I'm going to explain this why now. Usually, when we start looking for leaders, we tend to look for the great and powerful leaders. But as we all know, known from this course, leaders could literally be any one of us. Therefore, we know leaders to be in our everyday lives, such as a local business leader like Sharon Watkins, a former executive of Enron, where she would have displayed personal courage, where she exposed the breaches of conduct by her boss, Ken Lee. In doing so, Sharon risked the chance of losing her high-paying job, but she would have shown both personal courage and integrity by taking a stand against unethical practice of Enron. And there is other leaders such as our administrators, religious leaders, peers, family members, and so on. Assumptions about ethical leadership. There are many myths and understanding about leadership. Therefore, Lucas and Anelio, 1995, proposed 8 assumptions about ethical leadership. Here, they would have put 8 central themes to study and practice. Ethics is the heart of leadership. Does anyone have an idea why ethics is the heart of leadership. No? Keelan?
Repeat the question again for me.
Do you have an idea of why ethics would be considered the heart of leadership?
Well, if there's a leader, you should have some kind of form of ethics, right? Ethics basically is your principle telling you right or wrong, good or bad. And if you don't have that, how you gonna be a leader or good leader?
Yes. Correct, yes. So yes, ethics is basically that. So on to the other point we have, which is all leadership is value driven. We see this because when individuals enter a group or an organization, they bring their own values and beliefs about what is right and what is wrong, and also what is fair and what is unfair. And the other members of the group would obviously have to embrace the individual's morals and values, and they could obviously learn from this and obviously better themselves. The next point is personal values intersect with organizational values. Here we can relate to last class presentation where we would have had to look at ourselves and do reflections on our personal core values and relate to the values of organization or community, which help us to guide our decisions. We can also have ethical leadership can be learned. And it's really simple like that. It's the learning process from past experience, reflections, conceptualization, and application. Ethical leadership involves a connection between, on the point 5, ethical leadership involves a connection between ethical thought and action. This one I think we can relate to the most, as this chapter is not to really have you learn about the theories, but engage in the ethical analysis and apply it to your everyday lifestyle. 6, character development is an essential integrity of ethical leadership. 7, ethical leaders is a shared purpose. This is where all members of all levels within the organization have the ability to participate in the process of exercising ethical leadership. Everything we do teach. This is as simple as it is. We learn from other people setting examples or by watching certain stuff. We have cultural assumptions. In cultural assumptions, there is no universal agreement on what behavior would be considered appropriate, legal, ethical, or moral. The reason is that what would be considered ethical and legal standards in the 1960s would be illegal and unethical today, such as going to the barber shop or hair salon for females where they would have a divider of blacks and whites. And I don't know if you all ever watched Umbrella Academy, where these two individuals here would have went into a coffee shop that was for only white folks. And when they went into the shop, the persons behind the counter refused to serve them because they would have been considered as in the wrong shop. Now that there are so many different cultures and races, the goals in comparing the different cultures and their practices would be to understand them and not judge them for bad or good. In 1990, Kangugo and Mandonica 1997 stated that morally good acts are based on moral values that are universal because they incorporate fundamental values such as truth, goodness, beauty, courage, and justice. These values are all found in all cultures, although the cultures may differ in regards to the types of values. Everything could be combined. Right. I will now leave it with this quote. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is the right thing to do.
Now on to the next section, ethical theories and moral purposes. The study of human behavior as it relates to ethics and ethical development reaches back to the 18th and 19th century philosophers and scholars, such as Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. Below here we have a picture of Immanuel Kant, who lived from 1724 to 1804. And next, we have a quote from John Stuart Mill. And after I read this quote, I'd like you to please raise your hand on the raise your virtual hand if you agree with it. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not sufficient warrant. So basically, it's only right, or it's only considered ethical for a leader of high power to force something on a community if it's to prevent the harm to others. Raise your hand if you agree with this quote. Yes, I also agree with it. Moving on now, ethical theories provide a glimpse into how human judgments are made and the thought processes individuals engage in to solve ethical dilemmas and other problems. One of these theories is the Transforming Leadership Theory by James MacGregor Burns. Transforming leadership is a process in which leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. It involves persuasion, a desire to change something, and multidirectional influence relationships between leaders and participants. Values or ideals such as peace, justice, fairness, liberty, equal opportunity, and people's general welfare are expressed by transformational leaders who are value driven. They have a core set of values that are consistent with their actions. Modeling a moral purpose. If participants admire or identify with another member or leader, they will be more likely to imitate that person's behavior. The social learning theory provides a framework for understanding how individuals learn from others. People can learn indirectly from observation or by vicarious learning. The observational learning has its history in the practices of ancient Greeks, who referred to this concept as imitation. Behavioral modeling by leaders and participants offers a type of vicarious learning stimulus in organizational settings. Exemplars or models significantly influence the decision-making in organizations, eliciting ethical or unethical behaviors. Vicarious learning or behavioral modeling has important implications for the leadership process. Organizational and community members can learn ethical practices by observing those who model these practices in their leadership approaches. Another form of modeling is when leaders or participants engage in discussions of ethical issues or bring up ethical dilemmas that can be resolved through an exchange of multiple perspectives. Moral talk. A question to the class that I have you ever had a conversation where a moral discussion was taking place and you were unwilling to give your input into the conversation? Please raise your hands if so. Would anyone care to elaborate on their experience?
Hi.
Hi, Melinda.
Hi. What this happened to me in a work meeting actually. Um, the area manager of the organization came up and started to talk about morals and the organization and you as an individual and ethics and all of that. And
Yeah.
I stayed silent only for one reason because that individual himself was not a moral person and he was a horrible person in the sense of he did not practice any positive leadership styles. So that is
Right.
the reason I kept my mouth shut.
Okay, thank you for sharing. It is often hard to know how to approach a conversation about moral questions. Leaders and participants would benefit by engaging in conversations that allow people to explore the moral complexities and dimensions of problems or dilemmas. Bird and Waters, 1989, provide an interesting notion of modeling or influencing ethical behavior through verbal exchanges or moral talk, or dialogic leadership. The dialogic leader initiates discussions with peers and members about what is ethical and what the material interests of individuals are. Unfortunately, individuals often hesitate to participate in moral talk or discussions about ethical dilemmas. Although the topic of ethics is encountered by individual leaders and participants, little discourse about ethics takes place among group members. This lack of discussion about ethics is referred to as moral muteness. So, in Melinda's case, one of her reasons for moral muteness would have been that she would have observed the leader doesn't have good morals and she would have preferred to keep her morals to herself. Some other reasons is the avoidance of complex problems with moral overtones. Another is the protection of the positional leader's own managerial flexibility in solving problems. Thirdly, we have avoidance of dealing with varying ideologic or moralistic perspectives. So it can be intimidating when we notice that other people have different perspectives compared to us. And lastly, we have group members may also avoid discussions of ethics and morals due to their own ethical illiteracy. Some people may not have firm ethical beliefs, or they may not have enough information on an ethical topic to, to put their input into a conversation. Potential harm of moral muteness. The neglect of moral abuses or an environment that is indifferent to moral considerations. This can potentially inhibit the problem solving process. It is the shared responsibility of members and leaders to initiate moral talk and to avoid moral muteness. Moral expressions have the potential to arouse feelings of connection with moral action. For the modeling effect to occur, the language in moral talk has to be connected with experiences and expectations of people involved in the organization. Moral talk can be used as a type of modeling influence when the dialogue is used to identify problems, consider issues, advocate and criticize policies, and justify and explain decisions. Ethical decision making models. The relational leadership model is the emphasis on inclusive and process oriented leadership to achieve results for the common good. And this model suggests that leaders and members both be included in addressing ethical dilemmas. Leaders and participants together need to be reflective, challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when working through ethical issues. There are several approaches you can use to resolve ethical dilemmas. Some situations might call for using a professional code of conduct. However, Not all situations can be resolved by the application of professional codes or organizational standards. It requires human judgment and analysis to even determine whether the situation represents an ethical dilemma or if it's just something else like a personality conflict between two members. Although one of several models could be used to guide ethical decision making, the following section includes models that can be used as a practice tool to resolve ethical dilemmas. Before we get into it, an ethical dilemma is one of those right versus right situations in which two core moral values come into conflict. Kidder in 2005 provided a framework for examining right versus right choices using a four-dilemma paradigm model. The first one being justice versus mercy, which is when fairness and equity conflict with compassion, empathy, and love. Secondly, short-term versus long-term, which is when immediate needs run counter to future goals. Thirdly, we have individuals versus community. This is self versus others, or small group versus larger group. Lastly, truth versus loyalty, which is when honesty competes with commitment, responsibility, or promise keeping. Kidder in 1995 provided three principles for ethical decision making. Firstly, ends-based thinking. Philosophers refer to this as utilitarianism, best known by the maxim, do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Secondly,
I think you're muted.
sorry, how long have I been muted for?
Not
Pick back
long.
up on rules based.
Rules-based. Right. So you heard ends-based thinking?
Yes, we got all of them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Rules-based thinking is based firmly on duty, and it's about what we ought to do rather than what we think might work. This is deontological thinking, meaning based on moral obligation. You may be more likely to do what you think you should do rather than what you think might work when you're in an organization like a school or in a workplace. Care-based thinking is when you put your love for others first, and it goes by the phrase, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. An effective approach is to use each of the three principles before making a decision or taking an action to ensure that the decision you are making is ethical. Ethical principles and standards. Several scholars have adapted Aristotle's ethical principles, which serve as the foundation for living an ethical life and as principles or standards to guide physicians, psychologists, and counselors in particular. These five ethical principles are respecting autonomy, doing no harm, benefiting others, being just, and being faithful. Here we have a picture of a statue of Aristotle, and he lived in 384 to 322 BC. To recap, leading with integrity is a complex process that includes the moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, values-driven leadership, and the organizational environment. Despite the turbulent and fast-paced nature of our world, leading with a moral purpose is central to the leadership process. Imagine what an organization, community, or even the world would look like if everyone could strive to create and sustain an ethical environment by rewarding ethical acts, engaging in moral talk, carefully working as a group toward resolving dilemmas by using decision making models. For this presentation, the only source used was the Exploring Leadership textbook. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Okay, if there are no questions, I'll turn off the recording.